Because that whole idea of nature being healing was very much in force in the 30s. And of course it is, it's true.
Welcome to In the Parks, an Indiana State Parks podcast. I'm Allison Martin, and I'm excited to tell the stories of these amazing places in the Hoosier State. Our parks show off the best of Indiana, and it's time to go in-depth to really know the stories and discover what makes each destination unique and valuable as part of Indiana. On In the Parks, you'll learn about the people, legends, and places that formed Indiana's parks in the past and who is writing the story now. Today, we're going to learn about the Civilian Conservation Corps, the young men, white and black, who made our state and national parks what they are today. The one group I've talked about the most over the past 20 episodes is the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. If you've listened to all the episodes out so far, you've heard stories about their impact on state parks like Obatche, Versailles, Pokagon, and many more. Also, if you've listened to all the In the Parks episodes, thank you. I re-listened to some of the first ones recently and caught so many mistakes, glitches, and rough audio transitions. Thank you for being a loyal listener and coming along on my podcasting journey. It's something I want to keep getting better at because I think these stories really matter, and I want to tell them well. And today's story about the CCC is especially important. Since the CCC has come up so much, I wanted to provide some more information about the group, share their day-in-the-life stories, and explore the impact of white, African-American, and integrated companies on our parks. Here's a quick review of why the program was started. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt directed Congress to start the Civilian Conservation Corps. It was one of many programs that were part of his New Deal, which hoped to provide meaningful work for those unemployed after the stock market crash of 1929. His CCC directive specifically focused on, quote, forestry, the prevention of soil erosion, flood control, and similar projects. More than that, Roosevelt understood the importance of hard, hands-on work that connected young men to the land. He continued, more important, however, than the material gains will be the moral and spiritual value of such work. Roosevelt understood what many of us do. Working on the land and being out in it has a positive effect on your soul. Just 1 month after Roosevelt's bill, CCC companies were already being assigned around the country. The first one in Indiana was started in Morgan Monroe State Forest, followed by companies at Spring Mill, Lincoln, Turkey Run, McCormick's Creek, and Indiana Dunes. In the parks, the CCC companies were responsible for building park structures like shelters, bridges, roads, picnic tables, campgrounds, inns, and trails. They planted thousands of trees, and yes, they did dig out a lot of lakes by hand. The more I've talked with people about the parks, the more I hear about family connections to the CCC. When I interviewed Dan Bortner, the director of the Indiana State Parks, he shared his own family story.
My wife's grandfather was in the CCC,
Okay.
so we've got a lot of family history and memorabilia and things that he shared. A lot of the stuff that he probably shouldn't have shared, but you know, these were 19-year-old boys.
Right.
You know, they prepared the country for World War II. I mean, April's grandfather, George, they were from Jasonville area down there. They had 4 brothers. And there was a camp 2 miles away at Shakamak. They sent them all to Bluffton.
Part of the CCC's goal was to get the boys away from home and establish independence and routines. Almost 64,000 Hoosiers were in camps around the state, and there were also CCC boys who traveled to other nearby states. Each company had about 200 men, typically 18 years old and into their early 20s. I tried to imagine being a teenage girl living in a small Indiana town near a state park. They'd hear rumors the CCC boys were coming, and then they showed up. 200 young men, all those new handsome faces coming to town. Can you even imagine how exciting it must have been for their girls? And how terrifying for their parents. Thankfully, while the camps weren't part of the military, the discipline and structure provided many young men with a strong foundation for life. And they needed that, not only to start a family and have a career, but also for what came next in history, World War II. They didn't know it then, but the routines and lifestyle were equipping these young men to soon defend our country around the world. Roger Woodcock was one of those boys, which is what the CCC young men were called. He was stationed at Pokagon with Company 556 from 1936 to 1939 and became a skilled mason. The original gatehouse, which now holds the CCC Pocket Museum, is one building where his work is still visible today. He later served in the Pacific during World War II. Roger's the man we have to thank for an event I attended this past summer, the CCC Remembrance at Pokagon. He started it in 1953 and it still continues today. It was originally a reunion for the boys, but nearly all of them have passed away. So the event has changed to honor their contributions. Amy Wentworth, the Pokagon interpretive naturalist, and author Glory June Greif gave a presentation about the boys. I recorded it with their permission, so let's listen in as we begin the event with a visit to the flagpole, just like Roger and the boys would have done at the start of their day.
If you want to stay in here and eat cookies and drink lemonade, you're perfectly fine. There are some mosquitoes out there, so you might get bitten a little bit, but we're going to head out to the flagpole.
Roger Woodcock, the gentleman who was actually responsible for starting the CCC reunions back in 1953. So the Pokagon had the longest running CCC reunion, annual CCC reunion in the country. Wow. And it lasted for 50 years and beyond. Roger finally, after 50 years, said, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. He still kept coming until his death. But the park happily took it over at that time.
At the flagpole, we continued to mimic the Pokagon Company by listening to a bugle play To the Colors. Glory June shared on our way out that a young man named Johnny played the bugle at Pokagon, but apparently he wasn't very good. And also, the bugle is just a really difficult instrument to play. He would still play at the reunions before his death and was a friend of Roger's from their time there. Afterwards, we walked back to the Nature Center, and Amy shared an overview of the program before introducing our CCC resident expert.
Well done. In your memory, Johnny.
Yes. If we have just a quick moment of silence just to remember all the men who helped with the Civilian Conservation Corps.
Glory June literally wrote a book about the CCC and the state parks.
Glory June Greif is a historian who did a lot of history on the CCC. And now Glory June is going to talk a little bit about a day in the life of a CCC boy.
I did write a book. This is actually a few years old, but essentially is still quite valid. People, Parks, and Perceptions. The CCC has its own chapter, as does every park. So the book is comprised of the history of our Indiana State Park system, and actually, as a good historian should, I lay the context down as to why this whole thing began, a little bit about the beginnings of the conservation movement back in the 19th century, which led to the creation of national parks and state parks, and then how our park system developed, and then the CCC and the New Deal, and how much they contributed to our parks and beyond to the, at that time, present day.
Glory June took us through the typical schedule Roger, Johnny, and the other young men followed at Pokagon, which was likely pretty similar across the state at other camps.
The day would start at 5:30. Johnny Romanek would sound reveille on his bugle, off key, and then they would all quickly get dressed and assemble down at the flagpole where we were, and listen to the colors, which you did here, and then hurry back to the barracks and line up 2 by 2 from each barracks and head toward the mess hall. So they would eat, and as Roger explains in his interview, they could eat whatever they want, however much they wanted. And these were growing young men. They started out at 18, but they lowered the age to 17, and a lot of boys lied about their age and got in as early as 15. So they go back to their barracks and dress for the day and make sure everything was spick and span, and hurry out to the trucks. But during 1937 through 39, there were 4 or 5 buildings being constructed all at once. And that's not including things like the beach, the trails, the entire trail system. If you lay over a current trail map on the trail map of the early 40s, they're identical, the same trails. So they built all the trails. And they built the roads to the park too. The park was hardly developed at all. It had the inn, and that was it, pretty much, and the beach at the end.
Across the state, the CCC companies were building incredible structures that are still standing, like the stone arch bridges at McCormick's Creek and Clifty Falls, the triple arch bridge at Spring Mill, the County Road Bridge at Pokagon, and fire towers at Lincoln and Obachi State Parks. We met Jody Heaston, a staff member at Obachi, on that episode, and she shared about the work they did at her park.
The CCC came to this property in 1935. This was just a wasted farmland. So they built everything from the roads to the lake, every single shelter around here. Our Kunkel Lake, it's a 25-acre lake. They hand dug that. So that's why we feel that CCC is really important to our property, just because it would not be here.
We have the CCC boys to thank for the Pokagon toboggan run, too.
This is one of the original toboggans. These are CCC boys on their toboggan slide that they built. So they originally built that for recreation. I'm not sure what year this photo was taken, but the toboggan slide, of course, has been through several iterations since then. But they only had a single track. They built it for fun, so they had something to do in the winter.
In addition to building, the boys planted thousands of trees across the state. Places that are heavily wooded now weren't like that 90 years ago. Pokagon was previously fields and an apple orchard. Shakamak had been a coal mine and land needed restoration. Jan McCauley, a board member with the Friends of Pokagon volunteer group, also attended the remembrance event. When she and I talked, she shared her shock at the forest growth, and Amy noted it as well.
Apparently, the CCC guys planted a lot of the woods there because it was more open when they first arrived. In fact, I was looking through some historical photos, and CCC was a big part of this park, as you know, a lot of the parks in Indiana. And I see one picture where they were building the bridge, and beyond it is an open, huge field. I'm like, whoa, that's all wooded now. It's amazing.
It's hard to imagine that the trees can fill in that quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Because they look like they've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they really haven't been.
Just to see these places without all the trees and all the foliage around them is just amazing to me, because there's a copse of trees standing here with a couple of bushes, and then there's trees all along. It's just amazing to me looking at these old photos and how things were.
When the boys weren't physically active, they were working mentally. Here's Glory June again.
Some boys would instead go to classes because they were learning some special skills. So they would work till 4. If they were nearby, they would return to the mess hall at lunchtime to get food and then go back out. But a lot of times they were pretty far afield, so they would carry their lunch. But they worked till 4, then they went back to camp, went to the bathhouse and cleaned up because they were pretty gritty, and they would change into uniforms. And they would either go, they would recreate, as you see those are uniforms of a sort. They would go to the recreation hall, but a lot of them went to various classes. A lot of the boys did not have, had not finished high school, so they went to classes for their high school equivalency. If they had gone to high school and maybe wanted to further their education a bit, they went to Tri-State and took classes and got some college credit out of it. And at 9 o'clock, taps was going, that was lights out, period.
So what did they get for all their work? Not a lot, but it was something to help out their families and give them a little spending money.
They earned $30 a month, and 25 of that had to go home to their families. Sometimes that's all their families got, was the $25. But they got to keep $5 for themselves.
$30 a month is really not much. Several online websites indicated that's the equivalent of $686 a month now. But when jobs were scarce, this was guaranteed income for the boys and their families. They were certainly eating better here than they would have been at home. Glory June also explained the young men were from all walks of life and places.
The irony is a lot of CCC boys would sign up hoping to get out west, and they want to go out to Yellowstone or some of those other places where they knew CCC was working. Well, they were working right here in Indiana too. They were from all over the place. They first went down to Indianapolis, to Fort Benjamin Harrison. There was a CCC sort of basic training camp there, just to kind of get you oriented toward the routine, and then they'd be assigned to their various camps. Sometimes a young boy who was starting to get into trouble, or maybe he came up before a judge for doing vandalism or something like that, the judge would say, okay, you have to join the CCC. So it wasn't a punishment, it was a hope that the CCC would straighten him out. And often they did. Everybody, without fail, said, oh, no, it made a man of me, I built muscle, I ate well, everything was prepared me for life, all these kinds of things.
An article that interviewed Roger in 2003 quoted him about his experience as part of the CCC. He said, "We learned how to live with others, learned what tolerance is, and most of us learned some type of skill. We can be proud today because what we did at Pokagon left this world a better place in which to live. It gave one a sense of pride and self-esteem." Roger, Johnny, and the other young white men weren't the only Americans who found self-confidence and purpose through the CCC. During the Q&A section of Glory June's presentation, one woman asked a great question.
Were African American males allowed to sign up?
Absolutely. And that's a tricky question because they did have segregated African American camps. And in fact, there was one up here outside of South Bend. It was called Camp Robin Hood. There are some, and I have the records, there were some camps that were lightly integrated. When I say lightly, they were in the camp. My guess is they probably were in a separate barracks. And when they got enough African American boys to join up, then they would set up a camp of their own. That was early on, and there was some complaining from the southern states. We can't have that. So that's why it really became an established thing to have separate African American camps. But there was a pretty large percentage of them, about 5% of them were African American.
Drawing awareness to the impact of African Americans on the state parks is important. I think these are stories that must be told and need to be remembered. I wish I had more details on the lives of these men and think the work it takes to uncover the stories is worth doing. Through the Indiana Historical Society, I discovered some pictures of Black CCC Company 517. In them, groups of 10 or 20 young men sit or stand in front of the barracks, their hands in their pockets or arms at their sides. A few men have their arms on someone else's shoulder. One young Black man crouches down while holding a bugle. They're dressed in dark pants, white long-sleeve shirts with leather boots, often wearing hats. Some are smiling, some are stoic. They're young, many are handsome, and they're strong from their days of hard work. Some are dressed in cook's clothes. A few stand in front of the medical building. There's some white commanders and supervisors included as well. Company 517 began as an integrated company, but as time passed and the size grew, it became a segregated group. With 250 Black men, it was the largest African American CCC company. They worked in Harrison Crawford State Forest and what is now O'Bannon Woods State Park. During their 3 years at Camp Wyandotte, the young men built trails, roads, the fire tower, campground, and more. They fought fires and rescued people from the Ohio River floods in 1937. Unlike the other white companies, they had fun taking trips to nearby Corydon, playing softball, writing company newsletters, and more. Joseph Ramsey was a member of Company 517. He said, "I've never seen such camaraderie anywhere, not even in a fraternity or a church. It's like blood brothers." The young men were committed to their work, both the assigned manual labor and their educational studies. Classes were offered in technical skills as well as typing, first aid, and French. There were positive interactions between the young men and the nearby city of Corydon, like basketball games and track meets against the local high school team. It was a far cry from true inclusion, but overall, Company 517 was in good spirits. However, the company later moved to work at a camp in South Bend. They continued to receive superior ratings, but then moved a final time to Portland, Indiana, where despite their contributions to the community, you'll soon hear how they faced racism and suspicion. In Indiana, of the 50-some CCC companies, 8 were African American. They served on soil conservation projects, in state forests and state parks. Some of the Black men were veterans, coming to the CCC with additional maturity and experiences. Nationwide, there were more than 200,000 Black men in the CCC, which accounted for about 5 to 10% of the young men. In Indiana, Company 1536 was the first African American company in the state. They worked at Spring Mill building fences, trails, and shelters. They also restored the Hamer House in the village. Even more noteworthy, this company was an integrated unit with around 8% Black men. Company 1536 was later joined by the all-Black Company 539, fresh from work at Yellowstone. Their white supervisor noted that more of the Black men had graduated from high school than the white men. He also acknowledged the, quote, high morale the groups had. These companies built the beautiful Triple Arch Bridge near the lake, which still stands today. Is it too on the nose to hope they were literally and metaphorically building bridges? Probably. Company 1536 also built dams to create Spring Mill Lake, another incredible accomplishment. Some Black companies had Black officers and supervisors, but most were supervised by white men. There were Black CCC medical officers and chaplains, and more than 90% were part of education programs, with young men later attending Black colleges and universities. Back in Portland, Indiana, Company 517 worked on soil conservation projects, but white citizens weren't used to African Americans in town, and fear isn't easy to uproot. The editor of the local paper, the Sun and Commercial Review, wrote about the response to the news of the company coming to town. He wrote, "Never have I seen a community so stunned as Portland appeared to be. Amazement seemed to be followed by indignation, and everywhere I went, groups of persons were heatedly discussing the news and voicing the protests against their coming." The editor reminded people that only applicants, quote, thoroughly honest, decent, healthy, and reliable were accepted into the CCC, no matter their skin color, and that they should be grateful because, another quote, these boys are coming here to give us a job of work that we couldn't afford to do ourselves. Now, he did follow that up with the reassurance that the black company would keep their place while they're doing their work, which is dripping with condescension and discrimination, but his message made an impact, and Portland citizens did welcome the company's help. Things seemed stable for a few months, until December 30th, 1939. CCC member Marshall Carter was in Portland, running an errand one evening. The 22-year-old stopped in an alley to relieve himself before heading back to camp. Remember, as a black man in 1939, there were likely not indoor or even outdoor bathrooms available for him to use. A white citizen saw him, shouted at him to halt, pulled out his gun, and shot Marshall. Marshall managed to escape, fled town, and amazingly got back to camp, bleeding from a bullet wound that passed through his torso above his heart. After receiving first aid from the company commander, Marshall was rushed to the hospital and straight into surgery. He was later moved to a hospital at Fort Benjamin Harrison, where amazingly he recovered, with no lasting physical impact. The incident certainly led to additional caution and fear in the CCC camp, but it didn't even make the papers in Portland. What was a life-altering event for Marshall Carter was sadly not even newsworthy to the white public. The occurrence was a reality for many African Americans in the 1930s and beyond. Whether related to the shooting or not, over the next few months, 34 men left the camp for other jobs. By 1941, the work in the area was finished, and Company 517's responsibilities were complete. Months before the shooting, Marshall Carter submitted a poem to the CCC newspaper. It reveals the thoughts he wrestled with. He wrote, "When you see a man error, don't let him down. You may someday trod similar ground. Don't judge a man by the way he looks at you, and say harsh things about him, for it may not be true. Don't judge a man at all, for none is perfect and true. Just measure out to him what you want measured out to you." Marshall's commitment to forgiveness, graciousness towards others, and humility about himself is admirable and commendable. Knowing what he faced months later in a dark alley, well, it's one thing to write the words, it's another to live them out. I don't know what happened to Marshall Carter after he left the hospital. His time with the CCC ended, and we lose him to history. He and the other CCC boys of all ethnicities were strong examples of commitment and integrity. Of course, they were also young guys, and I'm sure there were many hijinks and stories they're thankful stayed in the barracks. But overall, the men appreciated their time with the CCC no matter what happened. And afterwards, many found success serving in the military, their communities, and throughout the nation. Whether white or black, I wondered how the CCC was able to get such buy-in from young men like Roger, Johnny, and Marshall across the state and country. Sure, they were grateful for work during the Depression, but in the research I did, it seemed like there was also a cultural focus on the positive impact of nature and a desire to preserve and protect it. Glory June references this in her book about state parks. She found park brochures and trail maps that said for people, quote, "Contact with nature will refocus with a clearer lens their perspective on life's values." Like President Roosevelt, people were looking to nature to provide some sort of moral guidance. Consequently, the 1930s and 40s saw a massive increase in visitors to the state parks. In 1930, 470,000 people visited an Indiana state park. 10 years later, the number jumped to over 1.2 million people. I don't know if that kind of increase was happening nationwide, but it indicates that at least in Indiana, there was a need for connection with nature.
You know, during the Depression, this was it was 10 cents to get in, and you could spend the whole day, and it was a great place to be. So there was a great need, I should say, for a place for leisure activity where you can really embrace nature. Because that whole idea of nature being healing was very much in force in the 30s. And of course it is, it's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
We saw something similar happen in 2020 during COVID. Times of crisis led to a noticeable increase in park attendance that's still going on today. And not only was there a cultural influence in the state, the companies themselves cultivated that mentality from the top down. Here's Jody from Obachi again, explaining why the young men were so committed to the work.
So all the CCC had a newsletter All the camps had their own newsletter, and that was something else that they were teaching these young men job skills, and one was editing. But something that was quoted in ours here at this facility here was, it said that this property, it says, it was rather to change it from a useless, expensive eyesore to a place of pleasant surroundings, recreation, into one of the finest forests and game preserves in the country, just a place to go, enjoy nature's wonders, and spend happy hours in the outdoors. And then it goes on to say, with the sole idea it was built for your use, being the public's use, a monument that will be handed down from generation to generation. So they would say that over and over again to these boys, tell them that this is going to be such an important property and really a place for the community to come. And that's why the community still embraces it, because it was just put into all these generations year after year that this is like such an important property, you know, hand built by all these boys.
I wish all 64,000 Hoosiers who were part of the CCC could see the state parks now, when DNR estimates there were around 19 million park visits last year. I wish all those young men knew how much the parks still value and treasure their contributions.
That's something that we try to tell people, that we have this really rich history. That's again why we have that CCC challenge and driving tour, because we just are so proud of the history of these boys. And we also have a statue here, the CCC statue, for Sales State Park and Obachi, the only two in the state that have them. And our Friends Group established that because one of our Friends Group members, he was a CCC veteran from the Fort Wayne camp. He was so proud of being a CCC veteran that he felt that there needed to be a statue here.
I wish Roger could see his own silhouette projected into the front window of the original Pokagon Gatehouse, or knew the Hells Point Challenge took people past the dams he may have helped build. I wish Johnny knew there were statues of guys like him at Obachi and Versailles. Wish he knew about Obachi's CCC Trail Challenge that helps people learn about the important contributions he and his companions made. I wish the integrated company at Spring Mill could see people of all skin colors walking across the bridge they assembled and enjoying the lake their dams created. And I wish Marshall Carter knew that people were still hearing a poem he wrote in 1939. Those CCC boys left their fingerprints across the state, in parks and forests, in cities and countrysides. Their hard work, humility, heartache, and laughter created the places where we make memories and connections today. William Myers was another black man who was part of Company 517. He said his time in the CCC taught him how to live, what to live for, and where to live best. I'm so thankful for the work of the CCC and how they live their lives for something greater, infusing each day with purpose as they considered the legacy they would leave behind for the coming generations. A huge thanks goes to Amy Wentworth, Jody Heaston, and Dan Bortner from Indiana State Parks, and to Jan McCauley from the Friends of Pokagon for sharing their time with me. And an even bigger thanks goes to Glory June Greif for her book, her presentation, and her passion for the parks. I'm also indebted to many authors, historians, and researchers. If you want to learn more about the CCC, check out the articles and books listed in the show notes. In the Parks is not officially associated with Indiana DNR, but I'm grateful for all the incredible work they do for our parks. Please share this podcast with your friends and give it a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow along on Instagram and Facebook at In the Parks Online. Thanks for listening, and I hope to CCC you in the parks.